Okay, only 1 week left here until President Trump's deadline for Russian sanctions go into effect. The president is issuing some pretty sharp criticism of Russia's latest attacks on Ukraine. He spoke to reporters in the Oval Office yesterday. Listen.
I think it's disgusting what they're doing. I think it's disgusting. This is Biden's war. It's not my war. But I said if I get in, I'll try and get the thing stopped. But I think what Russia's doing is very sad.
Steve Yates, AFPI Senior Fellow and Chair of the China Policy Initiative, joins us here now. Steve, good morning to you. I want to play one more soundbite from President Trump, if I can, because he's talking about these sanctions that we've all been talking about for a while. Will they go into effect? He's getting closer to it, but even he is acknowledging that they might not work. Listen.
Yeah, we're going to put sanctions. I don't know that sanctions bother him. You know, they know about sanctions. I know better than anybody about sanctions and tariffs and everything else. I don't know if that has any effect, but we're going to do it. Europe is extremely upset. But this is a war that should have never happened. This is a war that wouldn't have happened if I were president.
So where does that leave our leverage?
Well, obviously, the president's justified in being frustrated. I mean, he's kept good faith with all parties in this. He was very clear as a bell what his intentions were: stop the killing, pursue an alternative path to peace and prosperity. He's talked to Russia, Ukraine, allies, and at this point, Putin is not reciprocating. There really aren't that many options under the current circumstances other than trying to affect access to financial and energy markets. That's what he's hinting towards. Europe and others need to go along. It sounds like they may. But this is basically the clear frustration of a president who's trying to pursue peace, but with big powers that aren't sharing that vision.
Yeah, and Russia is responding with threats of their own. I mean, basically saying to Trump, if you keep playing these games, these word games with the 50 days, the 10 days, that, you know, they're talking about a war, and not with Ukraine, but with our country. I do think this was an interesting op-ed from the Wall Street Journal here, talking about what Trump might be trying to accomplish here, sort of mimicking what Richard Nixon did. Mr. Trump has long admired the way Richard Nixon exploited Russia-China tensions to end China's isolation during the Cold War. And one reason he has said he wants to settle the Ukraine conflict is that he thinks it drove Russia and China closer together. Breaking up this axis could possibly drive Russia to the bargaining table with Ukraine. I think a lot of people would agree, but how might the president expedite that situation that he's hoping for? Do you think some of these trade deals, or at least a trade deal with China, might pressure this sort of breaking apart of their relationship?
Yeah, well, I see it a little bit differently in that, you know, in my lifetime, China's changed a great deal. The Cold War is a very, very different environment. And Xi Jinping is a different kind of leader of China's Communist Party. And all of the frustrations the president is experiencing with Putin, speaking friendly in terms from time to time, but not taking action that leads to peace, is likely to experience with Xi Jinping, who has been on a straight line of increasing tensions with all of his neighbors. So this really comes down to actions. My view is the big rebalancing on trade the president's been doing, the right path to set that course. Lessening dependencies improves our leverage, lessens theirs. Those are the things that will set that scene. But getting Xi Jinping not to cooperate with Putin, if we haven't even really imposed energy sanctions for China buying a lot of Russian energy, probably not likely to leave this Nixon move open to us.
And just with 30 seconds left here, of course, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is headed to Russia. Kind of a surprise headline from President Trump the other day. What does he have to say? What does he have to do when he gets there?
Well, I think he has to just speak very, very clearly on behalf of the president. It shouldn't come as a shock because President Trump is the most transparent man ever in American politics, same in public and private. But clear that president's frustrated, he's serious, but he's also serious about this peace and prosperity path if they just start stopping the killing and pursue the peace deal.
Okay. All right. We got to go. Steve Yates, thanks for joining us on your Friday. Have a great weekend.
A pleasure. Thank you.
But first, breaking tonight, President Trump says he is moving 2 U.S. nuclear submarines in response to what he calls highly provocative statements from a top Kremlin official. Deputy Security Council Chairman Dmitry Medvedev says President Trump's latest Ukraine ceasefire deadline is a step towards war between the superpowers. Correspondent Mark Meredith starts us off tonight. Hello, Mark.
Shannon, good evening to you. Tonight, President Trump is warning the Russian government to tread carefully after its former president, Dmitry Medvedev, said that the U.S. should be careful when it comes to Ukraine and its efforts to end the war.
We're going to protect our people.
Tonight, President Trump says comments from Russian ex-president Dmitry Medvedev boasting about Moscow's military might are too provocative. Trump posting today, "I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions, just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that." Earlier this week, Medvedev posted U.S. threats against Russia will backfire, writing, "Each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war." Trump has increasingly called out Russia as peace talks to end its war on Ukraine remain deadlocked. Trump also remains critical of countries buying Russian oil, including India, one of many nations now facing higher tariffs between 10 to 40%.
He is leveling the playing field for the American worker and the American business owner. Does that take time? Absolutely.
Trump's latest tariff rollout means higher rates for many countries go into effect next week.
How many of these tariff rates could change again now and next? Not a lot. I mean, for the most part, we're set.
On Capitol Hill, reaction is largely split down party lines.
Tariffs are working perfectly. It's driving lots of manufacturing jobs back home.
Tariffs are going to decimate our economy if they are as extreme as the president wants.
Tonight, Democrats say the latest jobs report, which showed employers added tens of thousands of fewer jobs than expected, proves the Trump tariff strategy isn't working.
God help us. Hiring is down. Prices are ticking up.
Today's jobs report appeared to anger the White House, with Trump announcing he's firing Dr. Erica McIntyre, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner nominated to the job by President Biden in 2023.
I think her numbers were wrong, just like I thought her numbers were wrong before the election. Days before the election, she came out with these beautiful numbers for Kamala.
Today, the BLS also revised its latest 2 jobs reports, now showing 258,000 fewer jobs were added this summer than first reported. Another piece of economic news broke late today when we learned that a Federal Reserve Governor, Adriana Kugler, will be stepping down from her post early. This allows President Trump to nominate a new person to the Federal Reserve. Shannon, he has been an outspoken critic of the Fed, specifically its chairman, as he has tried to pressure them to lower rates as soon as possible. Shannon.
Yeah, and Mark, also tonight, we are learning that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting now winding down, apparently, their operations because of cuts that were supported by the White House.
They were. This was part of the resistance package the president recently signed into law that'll cut funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. There will be layoffs. It's expected to cease operations early next year. But the CPB is also warning this could mean that some rural PBS stations will not have the funding they need. Shannon.
All right, Mark Meredith at the White House. Thank you, Mark.
All right, big breaking news this afternoon. President Trump saying a short time ago that 2 nuclear submarines, Ohio-class submarines, are on the move because of comments made by former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. On Monday, he said, quote, "Each new ultimatum from Trump is, quote, a step towards war." Now the president posting on Truth Social, quote, "Based on the highly provocative statements of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions. Just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that, words are very important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances." With that, we bring in Dan Hoffman, former CIA station chief in Moscow and a Fox News contributor who you all know very well. Dan, thank you very much for being here. What's your reaction to all of this?
Well, look, finally, this has come to a head. Dmitry Medvedev has made these sort of threats, this rhetorical nuclear brinkmanship, going back to after Russia launched their brutal invasion of Ukraine. He did it because he induced the Biden administration not to give Ukraine the military support that Ukraine needed. Every time Russia threatened nuclear war, the Biden administration was so concerned that they were too afraid to give Ukraine what they needed. So Russia got what they wanted. If anybody studied psychology, it's straight out of Skinner's behaviorism. But the risk that you run with those threats is that we inch towards a potential nuclear conflict, which no one wants. And so President Trump is clearly messaging Vladimir Putin that this is irresponsible rhetoric from his deputy national security advisor. He's messaging the Russian army so that we don't have some miscalculation, God forbid. And he's messaging all the other nuclear powers to be responsible with their nuclear arms and not do this.
Yeah, these are extraordinary submarines. One Ohio-class sub could nuke 160 cities, according to the assessments. And, you know, I think there's a feeling that we haven't seen this kind of movement of this sort of weaponry probably since the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the president's sending a very strong message. And as you point out, Dan, when President Biden was in office, this sort of kept him, you know, very nervous about escalation and not really helping in the Ukraine war to the extent that maybe was necessary. Dan Hoffman, thank you very much. Good to have you here.
Thanks. Good to see you.
Thank you, sir.
President Trump there talking about deploying 2 U.S. nuclear subs to the region a little bit closer to Russia than here. Let's bring in our panel now. Fox News contributor Mark Thiessen, Fox News radio political analyst Josh Kraushaar, and USA Today White House correspondent Francesca Chambers. This is a little bit more what the president had to say on Truth Social. He says, based on highly provocative statements of former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, I can remember, Mark, not too long ago when people said to talk about Russia was to, you know, be in the 80s. And here we are.
Yeah, the 80s called. They want their foreign
The
policy
1980s,
back. Right,
yeah.
exactly. I remember that debate. Look, here's some free advice for Russia. Don't threaten Donald Trump and don't ignore his deadlines. Ask Iran how that worked out for them. Donald Trump has made clear that Putin needs to come to the peace table and negotiate. And if he doesn't, there are going to be serious consequences, including arming Ukraine and crushing sanctions and crushing tariffs on his oil industry. Medvedev said something comparative, said, don't go the path of Sleepy Joe. They're not dealing with Sleepy Joe anymore, and they need to wake up to that.
Well, and Francesca, this is something that the president seems to have come to the end of his rope on this dealing with Putin in the situation there.
And the comment today, though, was a significant escalation to say that we're going to put these submarines in the area. And by the way, we don't know where they're going to be. He has not said that yet. Compared to what you're describing, which would be sanctions and tariffs on oil, that would make it hard for Putin to continue to prosecute the war against Ukraine. So it's gone beyond, it sounds like, Shannon, the end of his rope and into what seems like new territory going directly at Russia, not just over the war in Ukraine specifically.
Yeah, and Josh, she mentioned sanctions. We still have the Senate and other places debating on what the next level of crackdown is, whether it will work, and if we're sanctioning countries other than Russia for their trade with Russia, the questions of enforcement come up too.
Yeah, actions will speak louder than words. Trump does like to get into fights on social media with a whole host of people, but it is, as Mark was saying, very refreshing that his tone towards Russia, he's running out of patience with this ongoing stalling and the fact that they are continuing to attack Ukraine with causing massive numbers of civilian deaths. I think he's lost his patience with Putin. I think the big question, though, is there's a bill in the Senate, the Lindsey Graham, Senator Blumenthal legislation that has been punted a little bit. That is the best legislative weapon to really put sanctions on Russia and really show them where it hurts. And I think that is the next step in terms of legislative action for Trump to employ.
But senators haven't wanted to do that, given that President Trump has said that he may take action in the next 10 days, which would be, by the way, next Friday himself. They're waiting to see what President Trump does at this point.
Yeah, and right now they're debating whether they're going on recess also. So we're all saying that, but they're not going to be here to handle that if they do. It is August in Washington. Okay, so while we're on Russia, the president also very frustrated and putting out on social media as well, this Russia hoax is totally undisputed now. The facts are there. So we have this release of documents that has come out now that has to do with some of what was being discussed. We're learning more of this annex from the Durham report, Mark, that gives us an inside look at what they were and weren't considering with respect to these allegations and how this whole thing got fueled.
Yeah, so this is fascinating to me because the Russia collusion conspiracy theory was one of the great political scandals of our time, that they literally hung this like a sword of Damocles over Trump's head for the first 2 years of his presidency, and it turned out to be nothing but a conspiracy theory. If you're a journalist and you were duped in this way, you have egg on your face. You'd think that you would want to investigate and find out exactly how did this happen? How did this conspiracy theory happen? How did it spread through the government? How did it end up spending tens of millions of dollars on an investigation of this? And how did I end up reporting some of this stuff that turned out not to be true? But there seems to be a total lack of curiosity on the part of the corporate media to look into this and find out why it happened.
Well, and Josh, if they report on it now, is it a concession or the fear that it will be viewed as a concession that they did get not the full story the last time around?
Yeah, look, I think some of this is old news. We've talked about it quite a bit over the years. I think there's an effort from the White House to distract from some of the controversies surrounding Epstein. So, there is a lot of misconduct and politicization of intelligence that we've talked about and we know about. I don't think there's a whole lot new from the revelations that were released by Tulsi Gabbard. But ultimately, James Clapper wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. They're trying to defend themselves and their reputations. There was a lot of politicization that the Obama White House did, but I'm not sure if there's a lot new in these revelations.
I found some interesting things in that House Intel report from 2020 that was unveiled now in public by the DNI, especially given that Clapper and Brennan have written this piece in the New York Times saying that they didn't rely on the Steele dossier for the assessment. But Francesca, that report from the committee back in 2020 says they most definitely did rely on it, and that there were people who argued with them trying to keep it out of the assessment.
Well, look, President Trump has told his administration that he wants them to investigate this, and that's what they're doing right now. And so, Shannon, we'll see what it turns up. It's tough to say, as Josh was just noting, what this investigation could produce, and then we'll assess the results.
Okay, I want to make sure that we get to this because the former vice president is back out there. We know she's got a book and she's doing late night. Here's a bit of what she had to say.
Who's leading the Democratic Party? I'm just curious.
There are lots of leaders. And
there's generally a leader of the Democratic Party. Like, oh, that's the leader of the Democratic Party. And who comes to mind?
I think there are a lot of, I'm not going to go through names because then I'm going to leave somebody out. There are some people who are born or grew up believing I'm going to be president. I want to be president. That wasn't me. It wasn't.
But Josh, is it going to be her in 28?
Well, look, I actually think she's not going to get back into politics.
Okay.
Anyone who's tied to Biden is going to have a lot of baggage. She was most tied to Biden, of course. She's going to have to answer for all of his, what he knew and about his health conditions and mental acuity. Look, I think the leader of the Democratic Party is Bernie Sanders right now. You saw we talked about the vote on Israel with Chris Coons. A majority of Democrats sided with Bernie Sanders. Zohran Mamdani could be the next mayor of New York City. The socialist energy that Bernie brought to the Democratic Party is really taking over it, and that's why Harris would have a hard time.
Okay, now we got to get to winners and losers, or I'm not going to get you guys in, and I know you want to get to that because I love some of these winners and losers. All right, so Francesca, start us off.
Okay, well, for my winner, I picked Justin Trudeau, who, despite leaving office this year, despite leaving office this year as Canadian Prime Minister, was spotted this week with Katy Perry, and Katy Perry is always very popular for your numbers. And the loser that I put down, Shannon, was Russia, but also its economic allies, because President Trump this week put down the hammer on Brazil and India and other countries, and as we were just talking about, potentially sanctioning them for purchasing Russian oil.
Quickly, Mark.
3 losers. But look, my winner is Liam Neeson and Pamela Anderson, who successfully rebooted the Naked Gun franchise. Yeah. And interestingly, Liam Neeson and Leslie Nielsen sound very similar. It's kind of interesting. My loser is Zohran Mamdani, who spent the week doing damage control over his anti-police tweets after the murder of that heroic New York police officer. The internet keeps receipts.
Yes, it does. Josh.
Winner is the Almanac of American Politics, coming out with one of its many editions. It's the Bible. If you want to know anything about elections, politicians, lawmakers, that's the book to read, coming out in a few weeks. It was announced this week. The loser is Michigan Senator Alyssa Slotkin, who has been trying to position herself as a moderate, a foreign policy voice in the party, but she voted, or she actually skipped a Bernie Sanders resolution that would cut off aid to Israel, and she ended up actually going on Stephen Colbert's show without even voting on the legislation, which she said she would have supported. So she's moving to the left and alienating both sides of the Democratic Party.
All right, panel, thank you very much. Coming up, it is Friday.
All right, President Trump also confirming that Steve Witkoff will travel to Russia as the U.S. pushes for a peace deal in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the president is also doubling down on his August 8th sanctions deadline.
Yeah, we're going to put sanctions. I don't know that sanctions bother him. They know about sanctions. I know better than anybody about sanctions and tariffs and everything else. I don't know if that has any effect, but we're going to do it.
Joining me now is national security analyst and international relations expert, Dr. Rebecca Grant. Dr. Grant, good morning to you. So we have Steve Witkoff expected to be traveling to Russia and that August 8th sanctions deadline. So will we see a breakthrough sometime next week?
Wouldn't that be nice? So Witkoff's trip, this is Putin's last chance to get some kind of good deal for a ceasefire. Carly, we won't see a lot of the details, but we know from the past that Witkoff has discussed, possible sanctions relief? What about future investment in Russia? This is Trump's effort to try to dangle some carrots in front of Putin. Remember, Russia has pretty much become a vassal state to China economically, and even with that accelerated wartime production, Russia's economy is very shaky. They're missing out on AI, all of this. So this is Witkoff trying to see if Putin will be rational and agree to look at some sort of economic deal in exchange for a ceasefire. Hope it works.
Yeah, Russia's economy is shaky, but Vladimir Putin is also saying that because they have so much experience with Western sanctions, their economy is sanctions proof. And then you have President Trump, expressing some doubt in the effectiveness of the sanctions that the U.S. could put in place on Russia. And also there will be secondary sanctions expected on countries like China and India who buy oil from Russia. So do you think that these sanctions could get Russia to the negotiating table? Will they be effective?
Maybe. And no doubt Putin prepared Russia's economy, moving away with currency and so many other steps. So it's a very resilient economy in that way. Good that you mentioned India. They made a huge energy deal with Russia. So part of this, of course, is to pressure China and India. And it's worth a try. I mean, this is really the lever that should work. We know Trump prefers trade and tariffs as his primary foreign policy instrument. I think it does have a chance of working if we can squeeze hard enough with probably moving to those secondary sanctions and getting then China, India, and others to add to that pressure and really reshape Russia's economic position. Europe's got to help us out on that, too.
Yeah, and on the China front, there's a really interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal. The editorial board is talking about how President Trump's economic negotiations with China could also include trying to get them to stop supporting Russia militarily. So they write, all of this is undoubtedly a long shot. Messrs. Xi and Putin declared their no limits partnership shortly before Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. And China is the dominant partner. It gets cut rate oil in return for delivering technology to sustain the war. It's hard to know if that calculus would change if Mr. Trump made clear he's serious about secondary sanctions. Unclear if it will work, but is this worth a shot?
It's worth a shot because breaking up Russia and China would be a huge foreign policy achievement. I've got to say that no limits partnership, so dangerous to the world, might not have happened without all the Russia collusion hoax nonsense. But at this point, it is our #1 global threat. Of course, that tucks in Iran, North Korea, and all the others, and the long-term economic prospects of China using its own currency for more settlements, et cetera. Breaking up China and Russia would be the best thing that Trump could do.
Okay, so something else I wanted to ask you about is these numbers are shocking. The number of children Russia has taken from inside Ukraine and resettled with Russian families. The Institute for the Study of War has an update on this yesterday. They say that Ukraine is reporting the number of children at about 20,000, but the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab places that number closer to 35,000. This feels like an underreported aspect of this war.
So tragic. And The Guardian says there are actually parents trying to go to Russia to search for these kids. Some were abducted, some were taken out of care homes, some were sent on supposed free holidays. But Carly, the intent of Putin here is to erase Ukraine's identity, and he's starting with innocent children. Such a brutal war. This has got to stop.
National security analyst Rebecca Grant, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.